Today's topic is going to be a doozy. We are talking again about the first overall pick from the most recent NHL Entry Draft, Connor Bedard, and breaking down where his 23-24 season lies in respect to the other quote-unquote generational talents in NHL history. Now, I wanted to give a really big shout out over to Paul Piduti, who does some adjusted hockey era stats and who made an article on dailyfaceoff.com earlier yesterday talking about Connor Bedard's rookie season, where it ranks, and what it means. Now, we'll get into the nitty-gritty comparisons later on in the video, but just to get the main profile out of the way, Connor Bedard is 18 years old, 5'10", 185 right-handed center, and he was the first overall pick in the 2023 draft. This year, he has 54 points in 56 games played, on pace for about 66 points in 68 games, and he's got 21 goals already. So, for all intents and purposes, he's a pretty good player. He's the top scorer on Chicago, he's one of the only scorers on Chicago, and as his career goes on, there's going to be a lot of excitement for what Connor Bedard will be able to do. He's already one of the best players in the world, one of the best shooters in the world, if not the second best pure shooter on the planet, and the fact that he is only 18 years old and still capable of doing all of this just gives so much hope to the fans of Chicago and fans of the sport in general. However, when you compare Connor Bedard's 54 points in 56 games played to other seasons of generational talents in the past, where exactly does he stack up? This is where Paul Biduti's era-adjusted generational talents chart really comes into play. Because what he did was he took a look at some of the recent generational talents and compared them across their ages throughout the years in their NHL careers. The generational talents we'll be looking at in this video are Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Yager, Eric Lindros, Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, and of course, Connor Bedard. The thing is, when you talk about these guys, a lot of their 18-year-old years were spent in their junior leagues. Now, I get it, this isn't technically like how it works in the eyes of the NHL. The NHL operates on a fiscal calendar that starts on September 15th. So if you're born after September 15th, you're not eligible for that year's worth of draft class. You're eligible for the next year's draft class. It just so happens that for Gretzky, Lemieux, Lindros, Ovechkin, McDavid, these guys were all 18 years old in their draft eligible years. It's only really a few of the other guys that didn't have this luxury happen to them, because for Jaromir Yager, Sidney Crosby, and Connor Bedard, they didn't turn 18 until right before their NHL careers began. So as you can see right here on the era-adjusted points, Wayne Gretzky was playing in the WHL, Lemieux was playing in the Q at 18, Yager had 51 points in an era-adjusted season with 82 games played. Lindros, Ovechkin, and McDavid were 18 years old playing in their junior leagues. Sidney Crosby had a 100-point era-adjusted season in 82 games at 18. Connor Bedard is on pace for 77. So right away, you can see that Bedard is already on path to being better than Jaromir Yager, which is not, an easy goal to attain, but he's still there. The era-adjusted stats depict this so. Sidney Crosby being at a 100-point caliber player already at 18 was just bananas, but I think we all recognize that Crosby is one of the best players of all time. Let's move over to 19 years old, where Connor Bedard unfortunately does not have a sample beyond this, but if you go over to the rest of the list here, Wayne Gretzky as a 19-year-old in the NHL had an era-adjusted 118 points, Lemieux had 87, Yager 70, Lindros 83, Sidney Crosby had a 127-point marker. Connor McDavid, this was technically his first NHL season. He was 18 turning 19. He had 98 points in an era-adjusted 82-game sample. So right away you could see some of the diversifications here. Wayne Gretzky isn't the top guy. It actually is Sidney Crosby, who had the best 19-year-old year, era-adjusted per 82 games. Lindros, Yager, Lemieux, these guys were all inferior to Connor McDavid in his 19-year-old year. For Connor Bedard, we'll have to wait and see what 24-25 has in store for him in order to get this reading on his metric. But it's interesting because Connor Bedard's 18-year-old year is already better than, let's just say, the 19-year-old year of Jaromir Yager, and it's only a few points behind Eric Lindros and Mario Lemieux. Not to say, of course, that Bedard is going to be better than these guys, but seeing the sample be so close together, that's where things get very, very intriguing. In fact, Connor Bedard is super close to Jaromir Jagr's 20-year-old year with Bedard's 23-24. Looking at the 20-year-old samples for these guys, this is where you started to see Wayne Gretzky really take into his own. Sidney Crosby declined a little bit, Connor McDavid improved. You're starting to see the 100-point seasons across the board here. Ovechkin had a 105 era-adjusted 82-game point pace at 20 years old. Lindros had 114, Lemieux 111, Crosby had 121, and Gretzky had 127. And then if you go over to 21, 22, 23, 24, this is where things get even crazier because, hey, Wayne Gretzky had a 156-point pace in an era-adjusted 82-game sample in this time frame. Lindros, 126. McDavid still at 110. Crosby went to 113. This is where he started to slow down just a tad. Not too much, but just a tad. Ovechkin declined a little bit as well, from 105 to 94. And then the rest of the guys in the olden days were getting just a bit better. It's unfortunate for guys like Eric Lindros because 120 was sort of his peak. He had that 3 years in a row before declining to 105 at 24 years of age. But Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby, these guys were all getting better. Connor McDavid got better. Eric Lindros stayed in the 120 range, but then he rounded out. Alex Ovechkin also was getting better, roughly hovering around that 120-point marker before going to 130 at 24 years old. Jaromir Yager had two 120-point seasons that was surrounding a 144-point campaign. And then, of course, Gretzky and Lemieux, they had the most on this chart with 176 and 174-point paces at 23 years old. So it's interesting because 23 seems to be one of the sweet spots for these older guys to get their peak seasons. Lindros, Yager, Lemieux, and Gretzky all peaked around this age on this chart. Meanwhile, for Ovechkin, Crosby, and McDavid, their highest seasons happened to be the 24-year-old year, at least on this chart. Ovechkin had a 133-point pace, Crosby 153, and McDavid 158. But the fact is, it took these guys 4, 5, 6 years to get up to this point, and for Connor Bedard to already start out at number 77, that's a pretty good marker because he already is beating out some of these other guys in the 19-year-old category. And of course, this is just looking at the quote-unquote generational talents, the guys that you think about when you think of hockey history. Not everybody's going to be included in here. No Auston Matthews, no late bloomers like Nathan MacKinnon or Nikita Kucherov or Draisaitl. A lot of those guys didn't really peak until their mid-20s, and that isn't really talked about here in the chart. The generational talents are normally the ones that are seen as the, immediate impact players. At 18, 19 years old, they're going to come in and they're going to do amazing. So to see Connor Bedard being played alongside of these guys, having essentially one extra year's worth of development in the NHL before really kicking into gear at 19, this is a pretty good opportunity for Bedard to show off what he's worth as the years go on. And if we go over to the article then which talks about this same thing, Paul Beduti's piece, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and read this yourself. It's written here that Bedard has largely been as advertised. The jaw-dropping toolkit he showcased in junior hockey has translated smoothly. His shot is already world-class, his effortless release and ability to make late adjustments with his hands conspiring to regularly fool NHL goalies. While he doesn't play with the personnel to pad his power play numbers, Bedard's creativity, vision, and threatening shot have generated significant scoring chances with the man advantage. And that's all with a terrible team beside him. If he was only playing with better line mates, this 77 marker probably is a lot higher than it is right now. Now, if you go over in this article to the end where it talks about the generational talents, the article talks about how Lemieux, Crosby, McDavid had themselves templates that were pretty good 100-point scores as teens and era-adjusted 140-point scores by their mid-20s. Is this a reasonable expectation for Bedard? Perhaps, but lots has to go right to keep up to arguably the two greatest players since Lemieux. Chicago's fortune in this draft lottery this spring, as well as the progress of their well-stocked prospect cupboard, will inevitably impact Bedard's output as well. Both factors are out of his hands. And so, when it comes to the future, if they're able to get some sort of a Macklin Celebrini or whatever, then maybe Connor Bedard's numbers will rise up tremendously. And we have to make another video in regards to Macklin Celebrini because man oh man, has that guy gone under the radar, I feel. We already made the way I want, but we will be talking about him once more as the week continues. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Connor Bedard and how he compares to the other generational talents in the NHL's history books. Big shout out over to Paul once again for providing us with the article and the graphics. Links are going to be in the description if you want to go ahead and follow him. I hope you enjoyed this video. 99 and bye.